Welcome to the EV Ready podcast, featuring industry leaders and their perspectives on electrification, hosted by EV Ready Energy.
Hey everybody, welcome to the EV Ready podcast, where we talk about all things electrification. This is a special episode, I'm excited about this one, meant for public entities and anyone interested in the procurement process for the public sector, specifically state and local government, education, and nonprofit organizations. I'm Justin Reese, President and co-founder of EV Ready Energy.
And I'm John Gilbrook, CRO at EV Ready. And today we're grateful to have Nick Trout, Senior Supplier Development Executive at Sourcewell, join us. We were awarded a Sourcewell contract for our Simplify product recently and had the chance to visit Nick at Sourcewell HQ in Minnesota. And it was great. Nick and his team have been hugely supportive in getting us set up on the Sourcewell contract. So thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome, John. It was a good time for you to come up, that kind of early fall setting. You got to take in the colors. I invite you to come back in January or February. Let's test out Minnesota that time of year.
Yeah. See how committed we really are.
So, Nick, for listeners who might not be familiar with Sourcewell, what's your role in the organization? And just give us a little bit of an overview of Sourcewell as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sourcewell, it starts with, we are a government agency. So we were established as a service cooperative by Minnesota statute back in the 70s. As a service cooperative, we were told by the state, go out and do things in a cooperative model. That makes more sense to do that way than have individual agencies do it. And so that's our founding, but again, government agency through and through. And so we are acting or serving as a cooperative purchasing agency. And what that means is we take our government status, we run public bids or public solicitations, we establish contracts with companies such as EV Ready, and then we offer those contracts out to other agencies to purchase through. And by doing that, our contracts may satisfy the bid requirements for other agencies. Then, of course, there's always the local purchasing policy component to it. An agency might have a purchasing policy that doesn't allow for contracts like this or has some rules about what else has to be done when using a contract like this. But that's the goal. That's the intention of our contracts. And so my role at Sourcewell as that supplier development executive is to work with our awarded suppliers, you folks there at EV Ready, to make sure that if you have questions, if a customer has questions related to the contract, I'm the go-to guy. I'm the source that you can reach out to and chat with and get those questions answered.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. So basically, Sourcewell is procurement made easy for public sector entities.
Certainly a lot easier.
Yeah. And for a little listener context, our team at EV Ready, we've developed our own software called EV Ready Simplify. And it's recently been selected in a competitive bid process that Nick just outlined by Sourcewell to be added to their list of products and services that can be purchased by public entities that satisfies public bid requirements.
Yeah, I mean, that's good context, Justin. And Nick, so from a procurement perspective, to kind of tie this all together, maybe you can be a little bit more specific about how Sourcewell saves time and resources for public agencies compared to going through a traditional RFP procurement process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as I said before, at Sourcewell, we're a government agency. We run a public bid or a public solicitation. Specifically, most of the time we run RFPs, which are requests for proposals. And we go through then that competitive evaluation process to award contracts. So in no way is this about skipping a bid process or waving a magic wand and making those requirements go away. What's happening for your customers is that Sourcewell already did that heavy lifting. Sourcewell went through the process step by step, checked all of those boxes. So now, as I said before, local purchasing rules depending, the agency can refer to our process to say Sourcewell ran that RFP process. And because Sourcewell did those steps, we now don't have to duplicate the effort. We can run our purchase order through that established cooperative contract. It's a very similar process to using a state contract. I'm sure any of the listeners here today who are working in public procurement have used a state contract before, or are kind of familiar with the idea of you could use a state contract for your purchasing needs. Similar idea, except instead of the state running the bid process, it is Sourcewell, this government agency based in Minnesota, but serving other agencies all across the United States and Canada. We're the ones who ran that public solicitation process.
Why reinvent the wheel, if you will, right?
Yeah.
I know that sometimes these open solicitations, they allow for multiple providers of kind of essentially the same product or service. So your members end up with the best price. But it's my understanding that in this solicitation, there were around 20 respondents, but upon reviewing it briefly, it does kind of seem like that none of those respondents really do what we do. Would you say, is that fair? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I will say, of course, there's always the opportunity for some level of overlap. I think some of it's we maybe got to take a step back to clarify Sourcewell's RFP process, just so I don't give any sort of misunderstanding or misguidance towards agencies. A lot of times when an agency runs a bid, what they're going to do is they're going to write up an IFB, which is an invitation for bid. And that's going to say pretty specifically, here's the product we want. We need these specifications. We need these capabilities. We need it within this time frame, because they're doing it for just one purchase, right? Or maybe buying just a couple pieces of equipment, but really it's a one-time IFB. Because it's Sourcewell, we're trying to establish a multi-year cooperative purchasing contract with suppliers. When we run our RFPs, we write them looking for best value suppliers. And yes, in many instances, we end up awarding multiple contracts at the end of our RFP process, but every supplier who responds is scored and evaluated based on a whole range of topics or whole range of categories, again, with the purpose of we're looking for best value suppliers. Everyone gets scored on a 1,000-point scoring system that we utilize at Sourcewell, and then we award contracts to the highest scoring suppliers. So yes, EV Ready, your product is, as far as I can tell, within our overall catalog, a little bit unique in what you're offering. But I'd say even more than that, the bigger thing is through our RFP process and our evaluation, EV Ready demonstrated you're a best value supplier. You're a high value supplier for our participating agencies.
Thanks, Nick. So just for our listeners, what EV Ready Simplify actually is, what it does. So what we do through Simplify and really through our energy management system we call Guardian, we connect a smart metering device to a building's overall electric system, which gives us real-time visibility into all the electrical consumption, both on the energy and power or demand side of that particular building. And that can include EV chargers, lighting, HVAC, really anything that consumes electricity at any given time in a building. And with that device, we're able to see that picture in our energy dashboard. And then from there, we're able to make real intentional decisions about managing the most intense energy consuming devices like EV chargers to optimize overall energy use and power consumption, and specifically related to the times in which energy consumption is most intense. And so the goal is to just lower overall electricity costs.
Yeah, and I'd say that given that our product, our cost-saving product is now on the Sourcewell contract and can lower energy-related costs for public sector. Nick, what might that mean, and why is that significant for any public entity that's already who may have already installed EV charging stations, maybe for fleet or public use, the fire department, police station, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so I mean, two things come to my mind right away thinking about that. The first is when an agency is writing in their own bid, they're prepping for an IFB, one of the things they have to do is they have to drop specifications. So let's be honest. I think there's a lot of agencies out there that would struggle to write up good, meaningful specifications for a high-tech solution like this. You know, because there's multiple departments they have to coordinate with. You're asking procurement officers to have a knowledge of this solution to draw up meaningful specifications for it. All those sorts of things. That's a challenge. That's a challenge for all sorts of different stuff that agencies need to buy, but especially more high-tech solutions. It becomes increasingly challenging. That's the feedback that we get from our participating agencies. So the fact that this is available, ready to go, that Simplify product through the Sourcewell contract, going to be a huge benefit to department heads and procurement officers who see the product, say that's where we want to get, but we weren't quite sure how to do an IFB for this or drop specifications for something like that. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing that comes to mind for me, one of the great pieces of feedback that I've heard quite a bit, especially from like fleet directors or even like grounds managers, electrifying your fleet, your buildings, whatever it might be, it's obviously, as you know, and I'm sure all your listeners know, it's not just as easy as we put a charger in, wire it up, and away we go. No, I mean, there's all sorts of things that has to go into this considerations for if you're a fleet director, you have to figure out how do I begin to actually implement electric vehicles into my fleet? You know, how am I going to factor in things like necessary charge time? Even sometimes the layout of the garages, you have to change the layout of the garages so you can actually easily get vehicles over to those chargers and get them plugged in and so on and so forth. So all of that to say, electrifying your fleet, your buildings, not just as easy as bring in the charger, wired in, we're ready to go. There's more that goes into it. And I've talked to a lot of especially fleet directors where they're not sure really where to start or what other things they need to be considering or what are best practices. That's usually not their major focus. Their major focus is we need to operate the fleet. We need to keep the vehicles moving. We need to get those things done. The question of really high efficiency within our electrification efforts is not something they're trying to deal with on a daily basis. So having a partner, having someone like an EV Ready whose whole role, I don't want to speak for you guys, but a major part of your role is to be able to come in and work with those customers and say, let us help you figure that out. You don't have to figure it out on your own. You don't have to be the expert on it. We will be the expert for you, bring you the simplified solution. And in the long run, this should save you money. That's a huge benefit for so many fleet directors, grounds managers, and certainly the procurement officers who are like, oh, good, procurement's going to save money. That's awesome. That's good.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point that, it's not necessarily the fleet directors in your example responsibility to look out for the lowest operational cost solution. And to your first point, I mean, if folks don't have an energy team or an energy person that's even, they might not even understand the breadth of the problem that they're about to cause by putting in EV charging stations. So it's a really good a good point. And I think with that said, Sourcewell, I do know that Sourcewell has had a number of charging station contracts available to members throughout the years. I think maybe since about 2016 or 2017. And I know that thousands of municipalities and fleets and higher education folks have purchased and installed EV charging stations using the Sourcewell contract, which means that they're a Sourcewell member already, right? Which makes it a lot easier to transact on anything else on the Sourcewell contract, right? Considering that the EV charging station really is a nascent industry, it's a very new industry. A lot changes every year, year to year, month to month even. And that you've had so many entities leverage the Sourcewell agreement to purchase EV charging stations from various manufacturers. Some of them are out of business. Some of them no longer support their products. What would you say to those folks, in terms of folks that have already leveraged the Sourcewell contract, bought something that maybe has other implications that weren't necessarily considered at the time?
Yeah, and that is a challenge. Unfortunately, we do have a situation where, to your point, you have a supplier who goes out of business or doesn't, discontinues a product, doesn't support it, so on and so forth. That's one of the benefits coming back to us running this best value RFP, looking for best value suppliers, is because we're not running a bid that's specified for one particular product or service. It gives us flexibility throughout the life of the contract where if you have a supplier that brings on a new model, updates tech, updates software, whatever it is, we have the flexibility on the contract side to respond to that. The other thing it does, I think probably what you were driving to, is it allows us to also award other contract categories, such as this category that you're in. So it's not just you can get the hardware via Sourcewell, right? If you're working with the charge points of the world or beams of the world or whatever it is. But if you want that partner to come alongside you as you're bringing on this hardware, bring this into your operations, if you want to find that partner to help you make sure you're doing it the best way that you can, we've got categories like this and suppliers like EV Ready.
Yeah. I'm curious, Nick, I think that one of the things you mentioned a moment ago, how whether it's a DPW director or fleet manager, right? Going electric there's broader implications, or the source of that is electrifying vehicles, choosing to now swap your fuel from a gasoline or diesel to now electricity. Not only is the infrastructure different, but basically everything becomes different. So that the subject matter expertise that these DPW directors, fleet managers have acquired over what might be a 20, 30, 40-year career isn't necessarily super applicable anymore when it comes to electric. They need support, and specifically related to energy costs, to fuel costs now, right? Within that, right, related to EV charging, energy costs tied to EV charging, specifically demand charges, are often a hidden, complicated, unknown operational expense for these Sourcewell members, these customers. Have you over the years heard rumblings of either they're experiencing costs that they weren't expecting related to operating these EVs, or maybe more specifically, just questions around things like demand charges and what makes up an electric bill? Do you get those questions from time to time?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I think a lot of times we even get even simpler questions, right? If, I got an electric vehicle and this is the range and takes this long to charge, how am I actually going to like work into my routes? Obviously with EV charging, there is more of that consideration. Okay, we actually have to optimize our garage layout. We have to optimize where we're going to put these chargers so we can get vehicles next to them at the right time over the right duration of time. I brought up the routing piece of it earlier, especially when you start to get into like heavy duty EV operations, like when New York City electrified a lot of their garbage operations, the Department of Solid Waste there in New York City. That was a big thing for them is if we're going to do this, we got to figure out our routes. We got to make sure the routing makes sense. So they had to consider all that. So I get those questions all the time. I feel like the questions that you're running into, like that's even next level, right? Yeah. There's a lot of fleet directors and public work directors. I haven't even got to that point yet of saying, okay, so now that we've actually figured out our layout and we've figured out how to make sure we've got the route capacity that we need and we're getting our vehicles charged at the right time. Now, how do we make sure that we're being as efficient with our costs as possible? So yeah, it's there's a lot of figuring out that's still happening in the public fleet and operations space. And at the same time, in the public sector, that's where frankly fleet directors especially are feeling a lot of pressure to electrify. It's a very visible part. That's the sort of thing like, your citizens read the newspaper and they want to see things like, oh, did we buy electric vehicles? How many did we buy? What part of our fleet operations are electrifying? There is that pressure, and there was grant dollars and all that sort of stuff too for a while. But that was the momentum that a lot of these, especially larger city fleets, wanted to see more of the fleet becoming electric, and fleet directors were having to answer all of these different questions beyond just, do we buy a Leaf or do we buy a Bolt? There was a lot more to figure out beyond just that.
One follow-up question related to kind of, again, the needs of Sourcewell members with charging. Almost always, you have to make an infrastructure investment. And once you have, you need to worry about asset management, right? Station management. Under Simplify EV Ready, we also take on the management of those charging assets and, assisting with technical support, configuration, warranty enforcement, just basically just try to reduce headaches and the time wasted by staff that become responsible for these assets because they don't necessarily, have a lot of experience with them. Have you heard from public agencies that dealing with things like these asset management issues, station technical support or configuration, have you heard things from them that these are also pain points? And do you believe these services are helpful to members?
100%. I mean, we know that unfortunately at this time, there's still a lot of downtime related with chargers, but yes, that's absolutely a concern right in the fleets there in the public sector. If they buy chargers, they want to make sure they're working.
Yeah, and on the station uptime, I think that's a huge thing. That's a really big problem in the industry that's been, plaguing the industry, I'd say, ever since the inception of the EV charging industry. Stations down, stations unreliable for drivers, drivers not being able to get a charge when they really need it. And sometimes stations are down on purpose because the owners of the stations get these utility bills and they don't understand why their costs went up so high, and they put cones in front of the stations, they tape them off, and they say, don't use these. They're costing us a fortune. So we're trying to solve those problems as well. So Nick, we've spoken a lot about existing members, right? Existing members of Sourcewell that have contracts already, of which there are more than 50,000 across the US. So I'd be surprised if any public entities are listening that are not members yet. But what about those that are not members yet? So if there is a public entity listening that wants to get involved and take advantage and here's something interesting today, what should they do? What does the onboarding process look like? What steps should they take?
Yeah, great question, Justin. Super simple process. And to your point, we have over 50,000 registered agencies at Sourcewell who have already signed up and are taking advantage of some of our contracts. So if you're a fleet director listening in today or you're some sort of department head at a city or a county, honestly, there's probably a good chance that your agency is already signed up with Sourcewell. Very simple to check. If you go to our website, which is www.sourcewell-mn.gov, one more time, www.sourcewell-mn.gov. If you search Sourcewell, we should also be one of the first things that pops up. Look for the .gov email domain. That's an important part. Right at the top of the page, there's a bright blue button that says register. So you click on that, and one of two things are going to happen. First, it's going to ask you, hey, let's see if you're already signed up. And you can type in your city, and it may pop up right away, and you'll see city of Minneapolis is already signed up. Great. That's so good for me to know our account number. Fantastic. Move forward from there. If you click on that button and your city doesn't pop up, super simple registration process, should take you like 4 to 5 minutes is all. And don't worry, it's free. There's no cost to sign up with Sourcewell. These are convenience contracts. Just because you sign up with us, you're not obligated to use our contracts. The reason we have a registration at all is the paper trail, so that if you as the agency were ever to get audited or need to pull up your purchase history, you reach out to us at Sourcewell. We can send that over. You have the information that you need.
Awesome. Yeah, and we can also look up if an entity is an existing member. That's really super easy to do too. So thank you for that. It starts with a conversation. If there's anything that we've discussed today that you want more information about or we can help with, feel free to reach out and just set up a conversation.
What advice would you give to them if they wanted to investigate, aside from going to the website or maybe in addition to looking their city or town up, what advice would you give to them in terms of like seeking the right colleague to help them with this?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, probably the place to start is actually don't be shy to reach out to Sourcewell. Once you hop on the website, you could search for any supplier you have interested in. So if you're interested in EV Ready, hop on the Sourcewell website, search EV Ready, boom, pulls up your page on our site, and you can easily find contact information on that page for here's who manages the contract at EV Ready. So Justin, John, you're going to pull up on that page, but then also on the Sourcewell side, who's got that contract. So my contact information is going to pull up. So if you're a fleet director and you're like, all right, I think I need a little more info before I'm comfortable going up to our procurement to discuss this, reach out and I can get you the information you need. I can get you reference guides. I can even talk to you a little bit about the history of your city and the use of Sourcewell contracts. And we can kind of feel stuff out from there. So that's probably the easiest thing to do. When you search for that supplier as well, you're also going to have access to the contract, the RFP, the evaluation documentation from Sourcewell's RFP when we awarded the contract. But yeah, that's probably the easiest place to start.
Yeah. Are there any common misconceptions? I guess anything you'd say specific to listeners who themselves are procurement officers at public entities that you'd want to clear up here?
Yeah. Believe it or not, one of the most common misconceptions that I get is, hey, you're not a government agency. I have a .gov email domain, and I will get emails that say, I don't know, we have to use a government contract. I don't know about this. So it's usually something really simple, really common. The other thing, too, is we get a lot of, we can only use competitively bid contracts. We can't just use a price negotiation process. Again, Sourcewell ran a competitive process. We ran an RFP. It wasn't just a price negotiation with EV Ready. So those sorts of things coming up quite a bit, as far as common misconceptions. And then you have the local nuance piece of it. So one that I'll hear from time to time is I will hear even if we use a contract like this, we still need to get 3 quotes. Now, this can be one of 2 things. The first thing is it can be a misunderstanding of Sourcewell's process. Again, they weren't clear that Sourcewell ran a competitive solicitation. We got, in most instances, well beyond 3 responses to our RFP. A lot of times we're getting dozens of responses to our RFPs, and that agency is just not real clear on, again, what we did to actually award the contract. In some cases, though, this is where the local purchasing policy can come into play. They can have a policy that says if you use a cooperative, best practice is still to go get 3 quotes. They can run into that. They can encounter that. That's one of those where that's a great time to try to set up a conversation, certainly with your procurement officer, but then if you need someone from Sourcewell to be there to help answer some questions and provide some documentation, again, great time for me to hop in and help.
Yeah. And I know we were one of 20, to your point, respondents to our bid solicitation. So Nick, this has been super informative. We've covered a ton of things. Is there anything that you feel we've missed? Anything that you feel is a good bit of information to share with our listeners here?
Justin and John, your questions have been great. We've covered a lot of ground. I just want to share one story to wrap up my comments here today related to procurement. I think, John, you kind of asked early, what's the time saving related to this? And I talked through Sourcewell's RFP process. But when you actually try to put that in practice, what can that look like? We know that bids can take a long time, especially the more technical it gets or the more nuanced that product or service is, the longer that bid can drag on and on and on. So one time I was meeting with a group of sales reps, and when I'm meeting folks in person, I like to ask, like, hey, what's the longest that you've ever sat through a bid? Show of hands. Show me, was it a year, 2 years, blah, 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 blah. So I had this gentleman in the front of this room of sales reps, and after I had asked, anyone had anything longer than like 18 months, his hand is still up. And I said, all right, sir, tell me, how long was that bid? And he said, I was once in a bid that lasted 4 years.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
That is crazy. And you think about, most of the time when that bid goes out, it's not for something that the department director or whoever needs a year from now, 4 years from now. It's something they probably could have used last week.
Yeah.
Right.
So to have to wait that long through a bid process, but again, there's steps you have to go through in a bid. You can't just, skip stuff. You can't just, make stuff go away. You have to go through, check all of the boxes, make sure you're following all the procurement rules. So you start to see why bids can drag on and on and on as you're making sure that all of these things are happening that need to happen. So if the Sourcewell contract can check those boxes for agencies, right? And that's our goal. That's our intention at Sourcewell, local purchasing rules depending, of course. Man, if we can save you a year plus of time that you'd put into a bid so that you can say, I want the simplified product, it's on the Sourcewell contract. Let's start working with EV Ready on that right now. I think that's huge.
Yeah, I just thought of a new tagline. EV Ready, we can save you 4 years off your project. Nick, we really appreciate your time. This has been an awesome conversation, very informative. Yeah, thank you very much. We look forward to getting back out there and doing some ice fishing with you.
You're always welcome.
Looking forward to it. Thanks a lot, Nick.
Thanks, guys.